Man and Superman is a play by George Bernard Shaw, first published in 1903 and performed in 1905 at the Royal Court Theatre in London. Man and Superman published at the start of the Edwardian era in England, ending the long Victorian era. This play is a modern philosophical drama, comedy and satire. It is set in the early 20th century London, England, and Granada, Spain. Don't forget to subscribe. Act 1 opens in the study of Roebuck Ramsden, a middle-aged British bachelor who likes to think of himself as an advanced thinker and fearlessly outspoken reformer. Though he's actually quite conservative. His room is filled with portraits and busts of famous intellectuals like John Bright and Herbert Spencer. He liked Darwin's theories when they first came out. A maid brings in a note. A young man named Octavius Robinson wants to see him. Ramsden agrees. Octavius enters. He's handsome but clearly upset. They've both just lost someone important, Mr. Whitefield. For Octavius, Whitefield was like a father figure. For Ramsden, he was an old friend. Ramsden shares before Whitefield died, he said he was relieved Octavius wasn't actually his son because he hoped Octavius would marry his daughter, and Ramsden thinks that would be fine, except Octavius is close friends with John Tanner, a radical thinker who wrote a controversial book called The Revolutionist's Handbook and Pocket Companion. Ramsden strongly dislikes Tanner and warns Octavius that marrying and might mean having to deal with him. Tanner, or Jack, as he's called, is an old-school friend of Octavius. Ramsden believes he's way too rebellious and inappropriate, especially now that Anne's father is gone. Ramsden thinks he's now Anne's new guardian and tells Octavius to cut ties with Jack. But Octavius defends him, saying Whitefield never had an issue with Jack, and Anne likely wouldn't either. Ramsden says Anne is dutiful and that Tanner's into unwise ideas like anarchism and free love and that sort of thing. Right at that moment, the maid announces Tanner's arrived, with Anne and her mother, Mrs. Whitefield. Ramsden is shocked. Tanner is young, imposing, energetic, and dramatic. Tanner bursts in, waving Mr. Whitefield's will, which names both Ramsden and Tanner as Anne's guardians. Ramsden is horrified and Tanner is just as unhappy. And Tanner really doesn't want to be Anne's guardian because he finds her manipulative and compares her to a boa constrictor. Octavius defends Anne because he's in love with her. Then the three men argue about each other's ideas and Anne's future until they agree to just ask Anne what she wants. She arrives with her mother. When asked to choose a guardian, Anne simply says she'll respect her father's decision and keep both of them. Ramsden grumbles that if her father had read Tanner's book, he might have chosen differently. Anne seems curious about the book and wants to read it, but Ramsden forbids it. Eventually, everyone has to accept the situation. Anne teasingly tells Tanner she'll call him Don Juan. Her mother reminds her they're supposed to be in mourning, so Anne suddenly acts all sad and dramatic. She and her mother leave with Ramsden, leaving Tanner and Octavius alone. Tanner starts ranting about how women are dangerous to artists. He says that real artists, like Octavius wants to be, should avoid women. He says, artists should study women, not fall in love or get married. Octavius objects, but Tanner insists women only want to trap men and hold them back. Ramsden and Anne come back in and they tell Octavius there's bad news about his sister, Violet. At first, he panics that she's dead, but they say it's worse, she's pregnant, and they don't know if she's even married. She's been seen with a wedding ring, but no one knows who the father is. And says Violet should be sent away. Tanner is furious that people think pregnancy is worse than death. He says it's actually a beautiful thing and Anne's fulfilling her purpose as a woman. Ramsden says Violet is in his house right now, needing help, and they argue again. Ramsden wants her married to the father. Tanner doesn't see why she has to be married at all. They even accuse each other of being the father of Violet's baby and then quickly deny it. And worries that Violet won't agree to go away quietly. Octavius, overwhelmed, just walks out. And tells Ramsden to go inform her mother about the whole situation, leaving just Anne and Tanner. And asks him to be nicer, but Tanner insists he finds her dangerous and controlling. She reminds him they've known each other since they were children. Tanner recalls telling her secrets and being betrayed, and remembers it all very differently. They talk about their childhood, and how differently they remember it. Tanner thinks she pushed him into being performative and rebellious, and just says he never gave her a chance to speak. He claims he's grown into a moral crusader, while everyone else just fell in love, and thinks all passion is moral and casually calls him a destructive child. He says he's still destructive but now he uses it to break down old ideas but Anne isn't impressed. Eventually, they start flirting, though Tanner tries to deny his feelings. Anne teases him, calls him Don Juan, and flirts more. Tanner rings the bell for Ramsden to come back. Miss Ramsden, Octavius, and Ramsden return. Miss Ramsden wants nothing to do with Violet, saying she's not sorry about her situation. A cab has even been ordered to take Violet away. But then Violet herself shows up. Violet scolds everyone for being so judgmental. Jack says he's on her side, but she's not impressed with his radical ideas either. Then she reveals that she is married. She just didn't want to reveal her husband's name for her own reasons. Everyone apologizes and tries to make it up to her, but Violet isn't budging and leaves with her dignity intact. Act 2 starts outside a big country house, where a car has broken down outside an estate in Richmond, London. A man in blue trousers is fixing it, and Tanner is standing nearby watching. He pulls the man out from under the car and who is his chauffeur, Henry Straker, but Tanner calls him Henry because of his Cockney accent. Straker jumps into the car to test it while bickering with Tanner about his driving habits. Soon, Octavius shows up with a rich American named Mr. Malone, who drives a steam-powered car. Tanner introduces Octavius to Straker and comments on how Straker works hard to sound unrefined, even though he's actually very smart and proud of his background. Straker looks down on upper-class people like Tanner and Octavius, thinking they're clueless about real work. When Octavius tries to impress him with a socialist comment about the value of labor, Straker dismisses. Straker goes back to fixing the car as they're planning a road trip to Nice in France. While they wait, Octavius tells Tanner that he proposed to Anne the night before, which upset her since it was so soon after her father's death. Because Tanner and Ramsden are her guardians, and told Octavius that he had to ask Tanner's permission to marry her. Tanner gives his blessing, but warns Octavius that Anne is manipulative and just wants a husband, while Octavius dreams of being a writer. Octavius insists he needs Anne for inspiration and says she's his muse. Tanner laughs this off, saying Octavius will get over her, but Octavius disagrees, claiming Tanner has never understood love. Straker returns, and Octavius gives Tanner a note from Anne's sister, Rhoda. It says Anne won't let Rhoda ride with Tanner, claiming he's a bad influence because of his radical views. Anne shows up herself and asks Octavius to go help her mother with Mr. Malone. It's all a setup since Anne wanted to get Tanner alone so she could ride with him instead. Just then, Mrs. Whitefield and a young American man named Hector Malone appear. He offers to take Violet for a ride in his car as he likes her. Octavius mentions that Violet is already married, though no one knows who her husband is. Hector, surprised but respectful, agrees to keep quiet. After everyone else leaves, Violet comes down the path and kisses Hector. It turns out they're secretly married. Violet doesn't want anyone to know yet because Hector's father dislikes the English middle class, and she's afraid it will cause problems. Hector agrees to keep it a secret until they're financially secure, and he invites her to join the trip to Nice. Meanwhile, Tanner and Straker come back. Violet and Hector pretend they barely know each other. Tanner asks Straker to nudge Anne into talking more with Octavius so he can keep his distance from her. But Straker says Octavius doesn't stand a chance since Anne is interested in Tanner. Tanner panics and says they need to get away fast. He jumps in the car, Straker hops in beside him, and off they go. The third act begins on the dry Spanish countryside evening, somewhere in the Sierra Nevada mountains. At the top of a hill stands a man dressed like a Spanish goat herder. Down the slope is a group of about a dozen young shady-looking men. The leader of these men is Mendoza. He's got black hair and a bit of a theatrical, devilish flair, and he speaks English. Mendoza reminds his gang, called the Brigands, that they've spent the last 3 days arguing over whether anarchists or socialists are braver. There's one anarchist and 3 self-proclaimed socialists among them, each with their own take on the matter. Things heat up during this debate, and someone calls Mendoza a slur for being Jewish. Mendoza doesn't deny it. He says, yes, he is Jewish and also a socialist. Then he reveals their plan. They've been laying traps to stop cars in the mountains and rob them, to secure a more equitable distribution of wealth. It's highway robbery dressed up as political action. Soon, Tanner and his chauffeur, Straker, show up right over the nails laid by the brigands. Mendoza steps in, introduces himself grandly as the president of the League of the Sierra, and tells them they're being robbed. Tanner explains who they are, but Mendoza asks if Straker is really a friend or just a chauffeur, because drivers usually get a cut of the ransom and can pass freely. Straker and one of the brigands get into a political argument, and Mendoza decides to call it a day, saying that business can wait till morning. Tanner agrees to wait before discussing any ransom. Mendoza explains that the brigands believe in doing socialism, not just talking about it. Tanner is impressed by Mendoza's intelligence and wonders why he chose a life of crime instead of enjoying life in high society. Mendoza shares his backstory. He used to be a waiter in a fancy London restaurant and fell in love with a woman named Louisa. But she rejected him because he was Jewish, saying Jews looked down on the English. Heartbroken, he left England and became a highwayman. He admits he's still in love with her. A shocked Straker reveals that Louisa is his sister. Furious, he tries to fight Mendoza, but Tanner steps in. Straker stomps off to bed. Mendoza reads a poem about Louisa to Tanner, who falls asleep mid-recital. The stage fades to black. Then, strange music begins to play, and a mysterious figure appears. It's Don Juan Tenorio, a 16th-century Spanish nobleman who looks just like Tanner. He's soon joined by an older woman, Dona Ana de Aloa, who's horrified to learn she's in hell. Don Juan tells her she's there because, despite her pious life, she never truly felt guilt, so she belongs in hell. Don Juan explains that he's there for killing a man in a duel, the father of a woman he loved. Ana is stunned. Her own father died under those same circumstances. She then transforms into a young woman, and it becomes clear she is the woman Don Juan once loved. She looks a lot like Anne. Another character enters. It's a statue, looking like Roebuck Ramsden. He's Anna's father, visiting from heaven because he finds it unbearably dull. He decides to stay in hell, which he finds far more entertaining. The devil himself then arrives, looking just like Mendoza. He's pleased to see the statue staying. He and the statue agree that heaven is boring, while hell is full of fun and pleasure. An annoyed Don Juan argues that heaven, despite its dullness, is where people pursue truth, knowledge, and growth. Don Juan delivers a passionate speech about human potential and the life force, a kind of spiritual energy that drives people to improve and evolve. He explains that men and women are driven by this life force to create better future generations, women through childbirth, men through thinking and improving society. Others are doubtful, especially when Don Juan says marriage is just a trick used by the life force to produce children, not some sacred moral bond. He insists that real progress comes from embracing change, not clinging to old traditions or sentimentality. That's why, he says, hell, full of comfort and complacency, is so dull. Finally, Don Juan decides to leave hell for heaven. The devil tells him it's possible, since the boundary between the two isn't physical but mental. Don Juan departs. Ana then asks if the Superman Don Juan talks about actually exists. She's told he doesn't but may one day. She mysteriously says, a father for the Superman, and vanishes. Tanner wakes up to find that Ramsden, Octavius, and Violet and Hector Malone have come to rescue him. But Tanner tells them not to attack the brigands, saying they've actually just been escorting him. Act 4 opens in the garden of a fancy villa in Alhambra, Spain. Henry Straker comes out of the villa, followed by an older man dressed a bit too formally for the hot weather. The man is Hector Malone and is Violet's secret husband's father. Mr. Malone and Straker start arguing. It turns out Mr. Malone is visiting from America, supposedly to see Violet, but Straker doesn't quite trust his reasons. Violet shows up and Mr. Malone asks to speak to her alone. When they sit down, he reads a note Violet had written for young Hector. The note is simple, but personal, and it clearly bothers Mr. Malone. Violet then tells him that Hector has proposed to her. Mr. Malone isn't happy because he wants his son to marry someone from a rich, high-status family, not someone like Violet. Violet insists she's just as good a match for Hector as any rich girl. Mr. Malone, though, seems more interested in status than money and hints that he'd even pay a titled English girl to marry his son if it helped his social standing. Then Malone shares a bit of his past. He grew up in Ireland, and his father died during the potato famine, not because there wasn't food, but because it was being exported while people starved. This history made him bitter toward the British class system, but ironically, now he wants his son to marry into it, to belong to the very elite that once oppressed his family. Just then, young Hector shows up unexpectedly. Violet tries to stop him from joining the argument, but he's furious that his father read his private note and is meddling in his life. He says they should go back to America. Soon, Violet's guardians, Tanner and Ramsden, arrive with and Violet's brother, Octavius. Mr. Malone assumes Violet is married to someone else and is scandalized by how flirtatious she's being. But she is married, just not to whom Malone thinks. Tanner, misunderstanding everything, actually praises Hector for challenging traditional marriage norms, still unaware that Hector and Violet are already married. Finally, Hector can't take it anymore and tells everyone the truth: he is Violet's husband. Mr. Malone threatens to cut off Hector financially, but Hector is ready. He returns the money his father had given him and declares he'll support himself. Octavius shakes his hand, and both he and Tanner offer to help financially, but Hector refuses. After everyone else heads inside, Mr. Malone gives Violet the money again, secretly showing respect for her. Malone walks off, saying she'll make a fine wife for his son. Tanner, still full of sarcasm, asks if Malone plans to buy the entire Alhambra. Malone jokes that he's only there for business with a man named Mendoza. The scene then shifts to Anne and Octavius. and flirts with him, and Octavius confesses his love and gently shuts him down, saying her mother wants her to marry Tanner. Octavius is heartbroken and feels betrayed by his friend. She tells him that marrying someone you don't love isn't always immoral, but it's just part of life. She says he'll enjoy being a heartbroken bachelor, since having money makes loneliness more poetic. Octavius isn't comforted, but seems pleased with how he's handling his heartbreak, almost like a tragic hero. And also admits she envies Violet's ability to get what she wants without games. On the other hand, Anne has to play on people's emotions. The two part, agreeing to forgive each other. After Anne leaves, Octavius is found crying by Mrs. Whitefield. She thinks he's sad about Violet's marriage, but he says no, it's about Anne. He also says Anne only wants to marry Tanner because her parents are pushing it. Mrs. Whitefield sets him straight, Anne's using her parents as an excuse. She's wanted to marry Tanner all along. Tanner shows up, clueless as usual, talking about Malone and Mendoza. Octavius leaves him with a cryptic goodbye. Mrs. Whitefield tells Tanner she loves him, Octavius, and Violet more than her own kids. Then she reveals and wants to marry him. A shocked Tanner insists he doesn't want to get married at all. Mrs. Whitefield agrees that and can be a bit manipulative. But that's exactly why she thinks Tanner's the right man, he's strong enough to handle her. And then appears, teasing Tanner about what she overheard, but he sees through her bluff. Violet announces she's off on her honeymoon, and Mrs. Whitefield wishes she were her daughter instead of Anne. When Violet and Mrs. Whitefield leave, Anne and Tanner are alone. She tells him he should get married soon. He protests that he doesn't want to. He's scared he's being forced into it by everyone else's expectations. She says she'll make herself ugly if they marry, just so he's not distracted. He's not comforted by this, saying he'd feel even more trapped. She switches tactics, pretending she's not attractive to him anyway, but he disagrees. Tanner begs her to marry Octavius instead. She calmly refuses. Then she reveals the truth. She chose him as her guardian so she could eventually marry him. He declares he doesn't love her, but she accuses him of lying. He grabs her, declares that he does love her but won't give up his freedom. Nearly every character rushes back in as Anne faints in Tanner's arms. She announces they're getting married. Tanner insists he's been trapped, but it's clear to everyone, including himself, that he's in love. Tanner tries to play it cool, saying the marriage will be practical, not romantic. The play ends with everyone laughing together on stage. Let's thematically analyze man and Superman. Shaw exposes the tension between public ideals and private beliefs through the character of Roebuck Ramsden. Ramsden claims to stand for progress and liberal values, but his behavior suggests otherwise. When he hears a false rumor that Violet, his adoptive daughter, is pregnant out of wedlock, he reacts with dramatic outrage, clearly revealing that his so-called progressive stance is still deeply rooted in old Victorian ideas about propriety, female virtue, and respectability. His moral posturing is undercut by how quickly he reverts to judgmental attitudes, showing that progressivism for Ramsden is more rhetorical than real. Violet's situation becomes a clever tool for Shaw to critique societal double standards. Although she is pregnant and not yet publicly married, her social status immediately seems to decline in the eyes of others. She's treated like a moral failure, evidence of how society harshly polices women's behavior while pretending to be enlightened. Yet Violet is anything but passive. She surprises Tanner and others when she expresses her own sense of morality, one that contradicts the liberal ideals Tanner champions. In doing so, Violet becomes a mirror reflecting the inconsistencies of both conservative and progressive moral codes. Her role highlights how women are often judged harshly by all sides, regardless of political ideology. And Whitefield, too, is a masterclass in contradiction. She presents herself as the obedient daughter, claiming she doesn't have opinions of her own and simply wants to please her elders. But in truth, she skillfully manipulates the men around her, especially the idealistic Octavius and the resistant John Tanner, and is determined, strategic, and anything but passive. Her actions show that she is fully aware of what she wants and how to get it, often by using the very image of feminine virtue and submissiveness that Victorian society idealizes. Shaw exposes the gap between appearance and reality, between what society says women should be and who they actually are. Tanner, for his part, sees himself as a moral rebel. He prides himself on rejecting traditional norms and sees it as his mission to challenge outdated values. He declares himself an iconoclast, someone who wants to shatter creeds and demolish idols. He's not content to accept inherited beliefs, whether about politics, marriage, or morality, without questioning their basis. In fact, he argues that to blindly follow one's parents' values is to abdicate one's own responsibility to think. As he says, the man who pleads his father's authority is no man, the woman who pleads her mother's authority is unfit to bear citizens to a free people. This desire to unmask hypocrisy and question inherited morality reaches its height in Act 3, the famous dream sequence set in hell. Here, Tanner appears as Don Juan, a philosophical version of himself, who engages in long monologues dissecting the moral pretenses of Victorian society. Shaw uses this dream to stage a deeper critique, that much of what passes for virtue, honor, chastity, duty, is more about appearances than true ethical commitment. The devil, representing Mendoza, uses sharp irony to expose this, claiming that hell is the home of honor, duty, justice, and the rest of the 7 deadly virtues. All the wickedness on earth is done in their name. In one of the most biting lines, he remarks, "An Englishman thinks he is moral when he is only uncomfortable." This skewers the idea that suffering or self-denial is automatically virtuous, especially in a society that values discomfort as proof of moral seriousness. Throughout the dream, Don Juan continues to push this critique. He argues that English morality is hollow, based not on justice or compassion but on superficial gentility. When the devil asks, "What is his religion?" "An excuse for hating me." "What is his law?" "An excuse for hanging you." "What is his morality?" "Gentility." "An excuse for consuming without producing." Shaw questions personal hypocrisy and the foundations of moral authority in a class-based society. Don Juan and Anna, who represent Tanner and N, debate what constitutes virtue in women. Anna claims that an unwed mother is less moral than she is. Don Juan strongly disagrees. He argues that the confusion of marriage with morality has done more to destroy the conscience of the human race than any other single error. For Don Juan, morality should not be confused with social rituals like marriage. He argues that the life force, the evolutionary force driving human progress, cares only about the survival and development of humanity, not about outdated concepts like honor or chastity. As he bluntly puts it, the life force respects marriage only because marriage is a contrivance to secure the greatest number of children and the closest care of them. For honor, chastity, and all the rest of your moral figments it cares not a rap. In Man and Superman, Shaw draws on Friedrich Nietzsche's idea that humanity is evolving toward a higher type of being, the Übermensch, or Superman. For Nietzsche, this figure rises above traditional morals and social norms to create their own values through reason and inner strength. Shaw takes this idea and blends it with his own concept, the life force. A kind of natural, almost mystical drive pushing humanity toward progress, especially through reproduction and self-improvement. Shaw imagines the life force as a force of nature with a purpose, to evolve humanity. Women, in this framework, follow their intuition to choose the best possible partners to pass on strong traits, while men, physically stronger and intellectually ambitious, are driven towards self-knowledge and higher consciousness. When these two drives align, when the woman finds a partner of true potential, and the man allows himself to be chosen, the life force's plan is fulfilled. Jack Tanner, the play's radical thinker, believes deeply in this force. It's why he reacts with enthusiasm to Violet's pregnancy, which others see as scandalous, and why he feels torn about his growing attraction to Anne. He knows she represents this life force, but giving in to her might mean giving up his independence and philosophical mission. The term Superman in Shaw's play is borrowed from Nietzsche's Übermensch, a concept first introduced in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche imagined the Superman as an evolved human, one who rises above herd thinking, religious dogma, and outdated moral codes. The Superman isn't immoral, but rather creates his own morality through reason, free of societal pressures. Jack Tanner represents this idea. He questions everything, from marriage to politics, and insists on thinking for himself, even if it makes him unpopular. But the irony is that Tanner, like all people, is still subject to human flaws and instincts. Nietzsche himself thought the Übermensch didn't yet exist. He was a goal, not a reality. Shaw's Tanner aspires to be this evolved man, but his struggle shows how hard it is to actually live up to that ideal. Shaw's life force is not gender-neutral as it operates differently through men and women. Women, like in Whitefield, are its agents. They use their charm and instincts to pursue men who can contribute to evolution. In contrast, men are called to introspection, to improve themselves intellectually and morally. Shaw sees the creative, contemplative man as the one who can approach the ideal of the Superman, but only if he doesn't get trapped by social expectations like marriage, which he views as mainly benefiting women. Tanner's dilemma is that the same force that pushes him towards self-knowledge is also pulling him toward and in reproduction. She represents the life force's goal of preserving and improving the species. By the end of the play, he gives in, not because he changes his philosophy, but because he realizes he can't escape the life force. Ironically, his surrender to marriage is also a kind of progress. The life force, it seems, pushes men and women both toward the future, just in different ways. For Shaw, the Superman isn't just a thinker, but it's someone deeply committed to improving the world. He imagines this figure as someone who has gone beyond traditional roles and seeks truth through philosophy and invention. In the play's dream sequence, Don Juan becomes a symbol of this evolved thinker, calling for humanity to leave behind empty pleasures and focus instead on discovering the inner will of the world. Tanner's evolution isn't perfect, but it's sincere. He's a man of contradictions, wealthy but socialist, rebellious yet slowly conforming. He mocks himself as someone who lives by robbing the poor, showing his awareness of social inequality. In this way, Tanner's journey reflects Shaw's vision of human potential, not a finished product, but a continuous striving towards something better. In Man and Superman, Shaw presents a sharp and often ironic critique of the traditional roles assigned to men and women, especially through the central relationship between Anne Whitefield and John Tanner. From the outset, Shaw flips expectations. Instead of the man pursuing the woman, it is Anne who relentlessly chases after Tanner, while he does everything he can to avoid her. This reversal is not simply comic, it lays the groundwork for a deeper commentary on gender dynamics. Tanner openly shares his views on women with Octavius, describing vitality in a woman as a blind fury of creation. To him, women are driven by an unstoppable instinct to reproduce and ensure the continuation of the species. He sees this drive as being in direct opposition to what he considers the proper role of men, to pursue self-knowledge, personal freedom, and intellectual growth. According to Tanner, these two missions, woman's drive to create life and man's task to understand it, are inevitably in conflict. As he puts it, of all human struggles there is none so treacherous and remorseless as the struggle between the artist man and the mother woman. For Tanner, marriage represents not love or partnership, but surrender. He views it as a trap that forces men to abandon their higher purpose, becoming what he calls the Superman, an evolved being committed to progress through self-realization. Ramsden, though far more conservative than Tanner in politics, echoes this feeling of entrapment. In the dream sequence, his statue confesses that marriage for him, once a proud and free man, was a kind of defeat. I knew that I was planting thorns in my pillow, and that marriage for me, a swaggering young officer thitherto unvanquished, meant defeat and capture. Tanner himself dramatically declares, I am fighting for my freedom, for my honor, for myself, one and indivisible, showing just how threatened he feels by Anne's pursuit. For him, becoming a husband would be a betrayal of his mission to advance human understanding, a contribution, he believes, equal to the biological creation of life by women. He who adds a jot to such knowledge creates any woman creates new men. Tanner's Nietzschean worldview helps explain his peculiar take on Violet Robinson's pregnancy. To him, her pregnancy is a triumph. She is fulfilling her biological purpose as a woman. However, Shaw subtly distances himself from this reductive view by having Violet rejected outright. Her grounded, pragmatic response challenges Tanner's philosophy, making clear that reproduction alone does not define a woman's worth or identity. On the other side, Shaw also mocks more conservative figures like Ramsden, who suggests that a woman being pregnant out of wedlock is worse than death. In this way, Shaw critiques both the liberal tendency to reduce women to symbols of nature and the conservative habit of treating women's sexuality as a source of shame. And Whitefield herself complicates things further. She's often seen as a stereotype of the manipulative woman, using Victorian notions of femininity, modesty, softness, obedience, to control those around her. But Shaw doesn't present this purely as villainy. Instead, he suggests that in a world where women's power is restricted, manipulation becomes one of the few tools available to them, and doesn't have access to the same kinds of agency men like Tanner, Octavius, or Ramsden enjoy. So she uses the means that are socially acceptable to her, charm, performance, and persistence, and oscillates between playing the dutiful daughter and the determined strategist. She claims to want only to please her parents, but we see clearly that she's orchestrating every step of her pursuit of Tanner. Her apparent duplicity is not simply a character flaw, it reflects a society that gives women very few options for exerting real control over their lives. In this light, Anne's behavior is less about manipulation for its own sake and more about survival within a rigid patriarchal structure. Where men in the play have many ways to express their talents, Octavius through art, Ramsden and Malone through business, Anne's only viable path to influence and security is through marriage. Shaw's critique becomes especially pointed in scenes where female virtue is equated with social respectability. The comic treatment of Violet's rumored illegitimacy, and the drastic shift in public opinion once her marriage is revealed, highlights how arbitrary and performative these standards are. Nothing about Violet's pregnancy changes, but the revelation of her marital status instantly absolves her in the eyes of her peers. It's a clear example of how moral judgment is based not on ethical reasoning, but on social appearances. Man and Superman affirms certain essentialist ideas, that women are naturally reproductive, men naturally intellectual. But at the same time, Shaw exposes the absurdity and social construction of these roles. The play consistently questions the ways society enforces and manipulates gender expectations, often forcing people to act in roles that serve the system more than themselves. by ridiculing both the exaggerated purity expected of women and the mystical celebration of their maternal role. Shaw encourages us to move beyond romanticized ideals and examine how those ideals function to limit freedom, especially for women. Hope you share and subscribe.